Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will get started shortly.
Bienvenidos todos, gracias por unirse a nosotros. Vamos a comenzar en breve.
Thank you for joining us. We will get started shortly.
Gracias por venir hoy. Comenzaremos en breve.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grounding Justice in the Land, Strategies for Advancing Reparative Spatial Justice.
Hola a todos, bienvenidos a Enraizar la Justicia en la Tierra.
My name is Rashida Phillips, and I am Director of Housing at PolicyLink.
Mi nombre es Rashida Phillips y soy directora de vivienda en PolicyLink.
Today, we'll be communicating in Spanish, English, and American Sign Language using Zoom's interpretation features.
Hoy nos comunicaremos en español, inglés y el lenguaje de señas estadounidense, también conocido como ASL, usando la función de interpretación de Zoom.
As part of our shared language justice practice, we acknowledge that these three languages may not reflect all of the languages that participants speak, the languages originally spoken on the land where we each are calling from, or the languages that many of our ancestors spoke.
Como parte de nuestra justicia lingüística, queremos reconocer que estos idiomas podrían no representar los idiomas que hablamos en todas las de donde venimos, idiomas que se hablaban originalmente en las tierras desde donde cada uno de nosotros llamamos, o los idiomas que hablaban muchos de nuestros antepasados.
Next slide, please.
Próxima diapositiva, por favor.
Still, we honor the diversity of our experiences and how we speak based on where we are from, the work we do, and our cultures.
Aún así, honramos la diversidad de nuestras experiencias y la forma en que hablamos según de dónde somos, el trabajo que hacemos y nuestras culturas.
We ask that everyone choose a language channel, even if you're bilingual. Otherwise, we may not be able to hear each other.
Pedimos que todos escojan un canal de idiomas, aun si es bilingüe. De otro modo, podríamos no poder oírnos todos.
If you'd like to share in both languages, please change channels when you change languages.
Si quieren compartir en ambos idiomas, por favor, cambie de canal cuando cambie de idioma.
To connect to language interpretation, on your computer, click on the globe icon located at the bottom of your screen and select English.
Para conectarse al idioma que prefiere, por favor, escoja busque en la parte de abajo de su pantalla en el icono del globo terráqueo y seleccione español.
If you joined on a tablet or iPad or smartphone, click on More, then Language Interpretation. Select English, then press Done.
Si se conectaron en tableta, teléfono inteligente, smartphone o iPad, oprima la opción más o los tres puntitos Elija interpretación de idiomas, español y por último, oprima finalizar.
And you should also have the option to choose American Sign Language.
Y también deben ver la alternativa de escoger lenguaje de señas.
Let's make sure you can hear in your preferred channel. I'm speaking English, and if you can hear me directly in the English channel and through the interpreter in the Spanish channel, you can give a thumbs up or a yes in the chat. Now we have a few reminders that support language justice. Some languages use many more words than English. Spanish uses up to 30% more. Because of this, when someone speaks too fast in English, this can result in the interpretation going too fast or being incomplete, and that leads to inequity in the message. We will speak at a moderate pace. If you feel that either the original language or the interpreted language is going too fast, please make a note in the chat. Why does this matter? Because language justice is a collective effort. Thank you so much, and I hope that you enjoy today's session. I'm now going to pass it to my colleague, Tina Grandinetti.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I just want to quickly introduce our panelists from PolicyLink. We have Rashida Phillips and myself, Tina Grandinetti. PolicyLink is a national research and action institute that's working to build a future where all people in the United States of America can participate in a flourishing multiracial democracy, prosper in an equitable economy, and live in thriving communities of opportunity. Here on the housing team, we see housing as health, housing as community, and housing as liberatory. And so today we are joined by the Center for Ethical Land Transition. The Center for Ethical Land Transition works to transition land out of the commodified economy and rematriate, return, and facilitate reunions between title holders, traditional owners, Indigenous and Black communities, and communities of color. And today we are joined by Cassandra Ferreira, Program Director, Neha Sharma, Strategy, and Abby Huff, who's Reunion Program Lead. In our webinar this morning, our PolicyLink team is gonna share an exciting project we've been working on called the Spatial Futures Initiative. And some of the work we've been doing in that space before passing it off to our friends at the Center for Ethical Land Transition. We'll be sharing about their work and some of the language that they use to challenge the property structures and systems of ownership that our land and housing policies are created in. And then we will have probably about 20 to 30 minutes for question and answer from the audience. And we ask that you type those into the Q&A box. We're really excited for this conversation. We've been working on this for a while with the Center for Ethical Land Transition, and we know that their work will resonate with many of you. So I will pass it back over to Rashida to get us started on our PolicyLink portion of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Tina. Again, my name is Rashida Phillips. I am Director of Housing and Land Justice at PolicyLink. And I am really excited to share with you the Spatial Futures Initiative at PolicyLink, which launched earlier this year in January. This initiative started from the recognition that housing and land exclusion are deeply racialized issues. They are embedded in the very fabric of our institutions, our policies, and our value systems. To transform this reality, we need to be able to address both historical and persistent spatial injustices. Imagine what our futures could look like if space were oriented towards justice. The Spatial Futures Initiative aims to expose the entrenched racial inequities in our country's existing land use and housing policies. Through this initiative, we are working to generate recommendations, resources, and policies to support that systemic change and transformation. Additionally, we lead research efforts and maintain a comprehensive list of policies and database and projects that are focused on achieving reparative spatial justice. This initiative is about envisioning and creating futures where justice is woven into the very spaces that we inhabit. Next slide, please. This work recognizes that the concepts of time, space, and the conditions of repair go beyond simple redistribution. It involves reclaiming our time and space, our temporal and spatial autonomy, by asserting control over our own narratives and experiences of time and space, which have historically been dominated by colonial frameworks. Challenging these colonial narratives means that we're actively questioning and dismantling the structures that have perpetuated inequity, exclusion, and violence and dispossession. We aim to create new cartographies of justice and belonging. These are innovative maps and frameworks that envision a world where everyone has a place and everyone has a voice. This involves integrating our Indigenous and Black temporal and spatial imaginaries, which are the unique ways of understanding and experiencing time and space that are rooted in the traditions and histories of our communities. By doing so, we're not only addressing past injustices, but we're also building futures where justice and belonging are central to our societal structures. Next slide, please. One of our first projects under the initiative was the Grounding Justice Report. This foundational document emphasizes the urgent need for a reparative spatial justice framework in land and housing policy. It serves as the basis for our commitment and acts as a call to action and an invitation for collaboration. The report illuminates the complex and multifaceted nature of reparative spatial justice, elevating critical concepts and diverse perspectives from the field. The Grounding Justice Report includes a comprehensive literature review by the PolicyLink housing team and empirical insights from qualitative research conducted by our partners at Social Insights. It synthesizes conversations with advocates, frontline workers, thought leaders, providing evidence-based recommendations for practitioners, researchers, organizers, policymakers, and advocates. These actionable recommendations, we hope, will chart a strategic course for those who are dedicated to reparative spatial justice. Previous slide, please. So I am also very excited to share that we launched just today our spatialfutures.org website. So spatialfutures.org is a hub that will have a database, a list of resources that we've shared through this project. It has the Grounding Justice Report. It talks about the fellowship, the Spatial Futures Fellowship that Tina will go into more detail about. We also recently translated the executive summary for the Grounding Justice Report into Spanish, fresh off the press, and that is also available on the spatialfutures.org website. So we are really excited to launch it, encourage you to visit it, give us feedback if there's things that you want to see on there that aren't on there, but please take your time to explore it. I will now pass the mic back to Tina to share more about the concepts and frameworks that the Spatial Futures Initiative engages.
Thanks, Rashida. So my name is Tina Grandinetti. I'm an associate here at PolicyLink on the Housing Futures and Land Justice team. And I just want to share a little bit about the terms and concepts that ground our work in the Spatial Futures Initiative. The first and most important is a concept we're putting forth as kind of an anchor and a connective tissue between many movements that we see happening on the ground, and that is reparative spatial justice. And our working definition, subject to change and evolution, is that reparative spatial justice is a transformative approach to rectify historical and ongoing injustices in the allocation and use of space, housing, and land. It's aimed at reconfiguring spaces where historically marginalized communities can reclaim their connection to land and gain restitution for enduring racist policies and practices. And we use this term as sort of a challenge to the ways that land and housing policy conversations tend to look at a snapshot of what our communities are dealing with now. A present day snapshot that doesn't quite capture the foundational violences that have produced the conditions that we live in today. And so reparative spatial justice asks us to be aspirational and world building, transformative rather than reformist, and community driven and place-based, as in looking at the context-specific histories that have shaped what our communities are experiencing today in terms of displacement and dispossession or gentrification. We see reparative spatial justice as kind of an umbrella for very diverse movements and approaches, and all of the different ways that communities of color, Black and Indigenous communities are challenging the dispossessive structures that they're facing today. And so in our ongoing research, we've identified a few key frameworks for this movement. That includes an economic justice approach that focuses on the restoration of assets and resources to communities that have endured generational harm. So sometimes this might look like financial restitution and direct reparations payments, or economic empowerment initiatives. Another is reparative urban planning, which aims to transform city and town planning processes to prioritize the voices and the needs of those most impacted by spatial injustice, to help our communities stay in place and to better shape the built environment that structures our lives. An example of this might be Louisville's anti-displacement ordinance. Then there's the abolitionist approach, which advocates for dismantling harmful systems and practices within housing policies, especially those rooted in punitive measures, like eviction and the types of policing that go along with that. And this can look like the decommodification of housing, diminished economic pressure on the housing market, and accountability shifts to communities who've been historically harmed. We also have, importantly, the land sovereignty and indigenous movements, which envision indigenous sovereignty over land and resources, including the right to develop housing initiatives through practices that align with indigenous worldviews and that reinforce indigenous political sovereignty. We see this in movements for land back and movements for land rematriation. And then finally, collective land stewardship, which reimagines governance structures in land ownership and tenure that continue to undermine the power of Black and Indigenous peoples to direct their futures. And we can see this in community land trusts like the New Communities and Segorote land trusts in the Bay Area. And then one thing that has continually come up in our work is this idea that we must really, in repairing and transforming these systems, we have to sort of take on the challenge of moving beyond logics of possession. And what I mean by this is that our current land and housing systems are defined and locked into what Brenna Bandar calls racial regimes of property. Our private property regimes are built upon stolen land and stolen labor, and specifically whiteness and masculinity and the power to exclude, right? So our entire property system is built on the ideas of John Locke, this old white dude who said that when property is produced when man mixes his labor with the land, and by doing so, lays claim to it, and that when he does that, he has an assumed position of dominance in the land, and he has the power to exclude, and he doesn't have a responsibility to anyone else when it comes to making decisions over his property. And whiteness and masculinity are constitutive of this version of property, and that's because this regime literally demanded the genocide of Indigenous people and the erasure of their ways of relating to the land. It demanded the enslavement of Black people, and it continues to demand the policing of any bodies that are seen as challenging or violating the rules of private property. This is the ownership model of property, and it underpins settler colonialism and racial capitalism. And it's why so many of our communities have experienced private property and, by extension, housing and land policies as a very violent force. It shapes not just the space around us, but also our conceptions of personhood and value. So that, for instance, homeowners and property owners are framed as pillars of our community, as drivers of our economy, while tenants or people experiencing homelessness are placed, several rungs down on this ladder of deservingness and value and humanity. I'm sorry, a reminder to slow down a little for myself. So when we interrogate this broader structure and the moral assumptions that come along with it, a lot of times we realize that when we're confronting histories of displacement and dispossession, we're still being limited by the confines of private property. That's what makes this regime so coercive, is that it often forces us to make our claims for justice and repair speak its language. That means struggles against the dispossession that we're facing often become struggles for possession. And so one thing that we are trying to do in our work at the Spatial Futures Initiative is ask, how do we answer dispossession with something other than possession? Because we want real material wins for our communities, but we also want to start chipping away at the very foundational violences of this system that produced these issues in the first place. We want to challenge these racist frameworks and the anti-Indigenous and anti-Black assumptions that they're built on. And so that's where we are looking to work on the ground that is creating new relationships that are not built on the power of exclusion, but on reciprocal responsibility, on stewardship, and on community and belonging. We see this in Indigenous movements for land back, where Indigenous people are demanding the return of lands, but in a way that is not rooted in a right to own land, but in a responsibility to care for that land and live in right relationship with it. And it's really important that we make this explicit over and over again, because we are constantly dealing with this contradiction. And we want to, create new ways of relating to land or revive ways that have been suppressed. And so in staking a different kind of claim to land and community, part of our work at the Spatial Futures Initiative has been to bring together community leaders who are already doing this kind of experimentation and nurturing these new systems in their own communities. And so that is where the Spatial Futures Fellows come in. We are about 7 months into our inaugural cohort of the Spatial Futures Fellows, which brings 10 fellows from across the country and occupied Hawaii together to advance their own reparative spatial justice projects and to build relationships and solidarity among themselves. And I will quickly preview 2 of our fellows projects. This one is by Vicki Howell, who works in Africatown, Alabama, a historically Black town, and actually one that was founded by people who came originally to America on the very last slave ship that was brought here and formed their own town, which has since been subject to decades of environmental injustice and is now, with the rediscovery of the Clotilda slave ship, working to advance their own community-driven development initiatives. So Vicki is working with making opportunities viable for everyone, to make sure that the forms of heritage tourism and economic development that come along with the national media attention brought by the Clotilda will benefit the people of Africatown. We have another project by Kawaipuna Kalipi in Molokai, Hawaii, where it's a community-driven initiative to buy back about 1/3 of the island of Molokai, which has been held by a private developer and has excluded the local, largely Native Hawaiian community from the subsistence practices that are so vital to their economy. So the Spatial Futures Fellowship brings together these 2 projects as well as 8 others, and we meet once a month to develop our projects, but also to learn together and explore these really difficult questions. One of them, which has continued to arise, is how can we structure our relationships to land and housing around care and stewardship while still navigating our current system and protecting our claim to space and community. And this is where our conversations with the Center for Ethical Land Transition have been so generative. They've been doing incredible work in supporting communities, particularly in California, but in other places as well, to facilitate reunions with land and to really materialize new ways of relating to land and to each other. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to the Center for Ethical Land Transition. Oops. I will stop sharing first. All right, can people see my slides and hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Rashida and Tina, for sharing more about the Grounding Justice Report and the great work of the Spatial Futures team at PolicyLink. We are so humbled and honored to share more about Center for Ethical Land Transition and explore what some of these concepts may look like in action. Before we dive in, I'd love to take a moment to introduce ourselves, and I'll pass it to Cassandra first.
Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. My name is Cassandra Ferreira, and I am a land transition facilitator with the Center for Ethical Land Transition.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Huff, and I am the reunion program lead with the Center for Ethical Land Transition, as well as working on multiple other projects.
Over to you, Jason, if you're able to unmute.
Good morning, everyone. Excited CELT gets to be here. My name is Jason, and I work on curriculum and resource development for the Center for Ethical Land Transition.
And I'm Neha, she, her, with Center for Ethical Land Transition, focusing on our strategy and convening the ecosystem. And first, I'd love to take a moment to ground into the context of our time. We're at a very pivotal moment in the history of the world. There's a big transition happening. We see momentum for justice and liberation everywhere. And terms like land back, rematriation, and reparations are showing up more in news headlines. We've recognized that it's time to meet this moment and the interdependence of human and land liberation. It's essential to center land because our relationship with land is at the root of our repair. And as we witness what's unfolding, we started to wonder, what is the movement infrastructure necessary in this time of just transition? Center for Ethical Land Transition was born as a result of this inquiry. We see the need for land liberation, for the reunion of ourselves to the land that holds our relationships, our culture, our languages. And we see the need for practitioners to hold culturally affirmative processes that are grounded in justice. And we are guided by a compass, which helps us orient to the different aspects of ethical land transitions. And what this looks like for us is first starting in the north, coming into right relationship with land. We constantly ask ourselves what it means to be in right relationship with land and how to put this into practice. As PolicyLink stated earlier, this is coming to new cartographies of justice and belonging. And in the South,
we see the work of facilitators, agents. It takes many roles, many hats, and many different expertises to come together in intersectional and multidimensional ways. We need skilled, justice-oriented practitioners who can help shift us from one world to the next. In the East, where the sun rises, we support folks in reunion with land. This includes Native communities, Black communities, and other systemically oppressed communities of culture and color, coming back into stewardship together. In the West, where the sun sets, we provide education and resources and accompaniment for title holders to meaningfully redistribute wealth. In this area, we reframe letting go as a way to reconnect and reunite. And in the center fire, we have the stories that bring us together and the learnings that we can all benefit from. As we've been doing this work for the last few years, there are a few key things we've noticed. Strategies for land justice are blooming, and this is just the beginning. There is a deep desire within the land back and reparations movement to learn various approaches to liberated land stewardship. While we've learned a lot, there's eagerness to learn more, to share patterns, and to mobilize more widely. We are right on the edge of a great movement. We also believe that creativity and innovation is key. We can transform the systems of today to create the systems of tomorrow. However, we must not allow ourselves to be confined by the default systems. We focus on innovative use of existing laws and systems in service to solidarity and justice-based transitions. We are witness to real estate agents and attorneys acting as agents of change with their expertise of modern conventions. It's such a powerful collaboration when diverse teams are capable of envisioning a future of work together that's on the path toward land justice. And if there's one big thing to take away from this slide and from this presentation, it's that this movement is not just about rematriation. It's also about reparations and justice for all systemically oppressed communities. Beyond our work in technical infrastructure, there are also great waves of cultural shifts happening. And as a part of this cultural shift, we are very particular about the language we use and the words we choose. I'll pass it to Cassandra to share more about this.
Hello again, everyone. I have had the incredible privilege of transforming a 20-year career as a real estate agent into a deeply rewarding and purposeful path of serving ethical land transitions in the last 4 years. And as a real estate agent and now real estate strategist, I am very aware of the intense ways that the real estate industry, as an industrial expression of colonization and capitalism, is full of terminology that upholds the objectification and capitalization of land. In our practice, we are continually learning to decommodify and de-objectify our language. Tina spoke to the nuances and challenges of language and worldview. And in our work, we acknowledge how language and worldview are intimately intertwined. As we center worldviews and land reunion that see humans as members of the living world rather than in control and domination of it, our language needs to change to encompass what we are actually talking about, which honestly is hard to do with the limitations of English. The very structure of other languages allow us to inhabit entirely more intimate worldviews. Next slide, please. I am going to introduce two word clusters that give a bigger picture view of the transitional ecosystem we are working within. Neha, if you could change the slide, please. In the real estate industry, the word transaction is the most commonly used to describe the transition of land from one owner to the next. Obviously, this reduces the relationships between the people and the land and is very object-oriented. In our name, we use the word transition to hold the work we do, yet what is actually happening is better described by transformation. Transformation is a state change, not just of the people, but the entire set of relationships with the land. Transforming culture and how the land is held in agreements is also part of the work. This is a multi-generational project of transformation. Next slide. Obviously, ownership is a hugely challenging word. So we often speak of this on a spectrum that we're moving from worldviews of ownership to those of stewardship, and hopefully to those in kinship. And of course, there are many worldviews that have never lost their kinship with nature and the living world. So we're in a changing landscape, and we still need words like stewardship, and certainly when we are in a code switching environment, ownership, to talk about our relationships with land. In our compass, I will offer some other words that we use to help us to move from objectifying ourselves, each other, and land. Land, housing, and building infrastructure is often referred to as property. Obviously, this word distances us from land and upholds the notion that we could possibly own land. We refer to land places with a capital L, land, with regard to the sentience and sovereignty of land. Given that we are in a transformational time, we are still working with the legal fiction of property ownership. We use the word culturally affirming to recognize that we are centering cultural reunion with land and support the creation of legal entities that reflect those in reunion. In the East, instead of referring to people as buyers, we use, which of course puts people in that object-oriented relationship and commodity-oriented relationship with land. We use the word as a process, which is in reunion. So not something that can just be accomplished, but is a process. The agents, attorneys, and other facilitators who support these transitions and transformations often have unique collaborative agreements, even as we support a technical process. So this facilitation is often referred to as accompaniment. In the West, we very rarely will use the word seller or owner. Again, only if we are code switching. we use the word title holder because it is a very neutral and factual statement, and it helps us say it like it is. With regard to title holders, I will also share that our use of the word relinquishment is, of course, very intentional to support the fact that many title holders are participating in one way or another in relinquishing their positionality and some their wealth and decision-making power. It is also our belief that those in relinquishment may also come into right relationship with land, and in fact need to, through the process of relinquishing what they cannot be in intimate stewardship or kinship with. I'll now invite Abby to join us in this flow.
Thank you so much. It's really good to be here. Neha, if you could move to the next slide, please. So what you see here on this slide is really the core and heart of the reunion program. We are truly seeking to shift the narrative of land ownership and accessibility and support the means by which land is stewarded by people who cosmologically center life, hold the generations to come in their visions and prayers, and contribute to the balancing of Earth systems through their stewardship. Through our connection to land, reunion upholds right relationship to one another, as well as our relationship to all things as core. And we seek to create a container of remembrance of how we as humans listen, not only to one another, but to the land and the elements, how we speak, our ways of healing, and our right relationship to the world that we live in. Most importantly, the reunion program is really seeking to create a container of remembrance that supports our ability as humans to thrive together in dire and complex times. So reunion.
Abby, I'm so sorry. Folks are having a little bit of trouble hearing you. If you can get a little closer to the mic. Thank you so much.
Okay, absolutely. Is this better?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the reunion program is a Black-led project led by myself and friend of CELT and collaborator Xavier Freedom of Reimagine Real Estate and Original Black Print. And the reunion program is really a response to the recognition that not only title holders need support through these land transitions and relinquishment of land titles, but people in the process of reunion to land, specifically Black, Indigenous, people of color and culture, needing a very specific type of support that is trauma-informed, culturally affirmative, and acknowledges the historical impacts of systematic oppression and how that has shaped and informed intergenerational belief systems, and how the systemic design of dispossession and lack of accessibility is intentional and has impacted communities of color. Reunion is in the development phase of creating curriculums that span from systems of self-governance, restorative justice to help internal conflicts, legal strategies for acquiring title to lands in culturally affirmative ways, collective visioning, somatics, healing, and redefining our relationship to capital, and more. So these curriculums are being developed in a way that supports not only direct client services and work that we do, but will serve as a core curriculum for in-person cohort style retreats that we plan on holding, we plan to start holding in 2025. So we started conducting interviews about a year ago with, in particular, like queer, trans, BIPOC land projects from across the country. And during our early listening phase of our program development, it was not just an opportunity for us to learn from people's journeys, but it was also an opportunity to help us identify the needs and places that we could potentially be of support as folks navigated systems based on the myth of white supremacy, homophobia, transphobia, racism, etc. We found that the majority of the land projects that we interviewed experienced really high levels of stress throughout their individual processes of acquiring title to land that were either long and drawn out or rapid, really fast. And both cases seemed to test the fabric of the relationships that were stressed and sometimes broken. So in our listening, uh, we listened to the wisdom of their processes, what they would have done differently, what support they could have used, the things that worked. And those are the elements that have really informed our curriculum building. Overall, it was really clear that with all of the land projects that we spoke to, one of the biggest priorities is to create safe spaces that are essentially resiliency hubs that are culturally, ecologically, cultural, ecological, and climate safe zones. So Reunion is really about laying a blueprint and guide for our communities as we navigate these times and strategize the use of various tools, including legal and capital tools. Although every land project that was interviewed was really inspiring, I was really moved by projects that had focused on disability justice and creating resiliency hubs that have the capacity to support the spectrum of needs of our disabled relatives, including strategizing power sources that could support medical devices in times of blackouts, strategizing and implementing access to the land itself. I also want to name that Reunion is not just about rural land projects, but it's also about urban land and place projects that create spaces for community and marginalized communities like system impacted youth, those in recovery, our houseless relatives. Sorry about that. Got lost in my notes. But one of the most inspirational projects that I've been able to connect to is a tiny home village in Oakland, built on an old Big Lots parking lot. And it's a tiny home village that was created for systems impacted youth. And they've developed art-centered, culturally affirmative programs for the youth and, you know, have modeled powerful coalition building through weaving in community resources like community healers, holding healing clinics, different elders coming in, being support for the youth, and other movement folks and organizers there to support the youth. Reunion is really an embodied journey that seeks to strengthen our human relationships and hold intergenerational visions. And I think one last piece is that in traditional way, some of the traditional tenets of healing and wellness say that to be emotionally, physically, mentally, and emotionally well, a strong connection to land and place community and creation itself are necessary pieces of that wellness. And that in itself is really the heart and soul of reunion. Neha, if you could move to the next slide. So in essence, reunion is this incredibly intersectional and multi-dimensional program with a focus on bioregionalism, very place-based, so that resources can be woven together. It's not just rural, but it also is urban. It's multi-generational. It is energetic, including somatic healing, embodiment, solidarity, and coalition building. And it really is an offering to the future. Next slide. I'm going to pass it over to Cassandra to get us into some case studies.
Thank you so much, Abby. So we are going to go into 2 case studies today. And we chose these 2 case studies because we felt that they would be particularly interesting to this audience and in this context. We certainly have others that we can share with you and are accessible on the web if you're interested. We chose one case study, the first one that is complete, and another that is a work in progress. Our hope is, of course, that elements of both of these case studies will show the diversity of how this work is being done. Our land transition approach, no matter who we're working with, always seeks to align with the interests and vision of those in reunion. We seek to meet the title holders where they are at and help educate wherever and whenever we can. Harm reduction is our baseline intent, but of course we seek to be part of healing whenever it's possible. We are always hoping to build capacity in the organizations and the regions we work in. And what that might look like is working with local agents and attorneys and other facilitators and really uplifting and supporting their role in place. And we are always wanting to nourish this innovation in title holding in service to Indigenous worldviews in relationship with land. Our first case study is one that you may have heard about. It is very historical and has made the news. This is the land transition accomplished by Movement Generation and Segorte Land Trust. Here are some photos of some of the folks in reunion and the land transition team and the land themselves. The highlights of this case study that we are featuring is because it was a very racialized strategy. And that is very indicative of the current state of white title holding, that you need to have a racialized strategy of reacquisition or buyback. We also featured this because of the inspiring collaboration between 2 nonprofits that came together to rematriate land. Looking at this through the lens of our compass, the orientation of this project toward right relationship with land was accomplished by an Indigenous-led land trust in solidarity with a 20-year-old justice and ecology organization. The title of the land is now held in perpetuity by Segorte Land Trust and has a 35-year renegotiable lease with movement generation. This co-stewardship allows these partner organizations to each play complementary roles in the current and ongoing stewardship of this land place. This is a buyback example in which the relinquishing entity was engaged in an off-market sale. The family had bought it from the original Spanish land grant and made significant wealth from parceling and selling off land places. And this was their last family land holding. This transition was supported with legal accompaniment by the Sustainable Economies Law Center, as well as real estate strategy and support from Xavier Freedom of Reimagine Real Estate and myself at the Center for Ethical Land Transition. I'm going to say a little bit more about the collaborators. Movement Generation is a 20-plus-year-old California-based Bay Area movement organizing hub. And among many other trainings and cultural support, they provide the Just Transition training. They are one of those in the reunion here. Segurite Land Trust is a quickly growing Indigenous women-led land trust in Lishan Ohlone homelands, also known as Oakland, California. And they are in a very exciting process of rematriating land and revitalizing Indigenous culture. And they are the new title holder. The Sustainable Economies Law Center happened to be the legal support for both of these organizations, even before they engaged in this land project. And so there was a shared language and also shared technical support. Xavier from Reimagine Realty and myself from the Center for Ethical Land Transition came in and formed their real estate team. The land itself that transitioned was rare 43 acres in the East Bay Hills. And again, this land had been acquired by the family that we went through the buyback process with, and it was very well situated in relationship to the Bay Area, only 20 minutes outside of an urban area, and yet allowing for a large land place to come into the rematriation of Segurite Land Trust, and also provide the home for Movement Generation's Justice and Ecology Center. So in this process, it was very relationship-centric. The caretakers of the land that had been living there for many years and knew that the title holders were seeking to, quote, sell to transition the title, brought it to the attention of Segurite Land Trust, who brought it to the attention of Movement Generation because there was already an existing relationship. There was an element of radical wealth redistribution in which a large donor of MG, of Movement Generations, also known as MG, was there to empower the reacquisition. But we had racially prejudiced title holders to work with. Because we knew the caretakers and we were able to assess their sentiments, then their ignorance, that were anti-queer and anti-Black, we realized we needed to form a very racialized strategy. And so we did our very best. It's very painful for everyone when in that type of situation, of course, but we did our best to strategize our use of whiteness and to put forward those of us who could do the cultural translation, if you will. And we navigated that toxicity together. In this situation, it was necessary for there to be a transaction that completed, so that that long arm of white control did not extend past the close of escrow. So in this case, transaction was a powerful tool for us to protect the future stewards that are now currently stewarding the land, and that provided that was part of our strategy as well. They would have loved to have continued to have access to the land, but we were able through the transaction to ensure that that didn't happen. So this was a really important example, I think, of what we're dealing with and how multiracial teams can work together in solidarity towards a land transition. In the next case study, Somos Tierra. And this one is a project here in Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo homelands where I currently reside. In the photo here, there was a recent gathering of the campesinas and campesinos throughout the Bay Area. Somos Tierra is a group of folks who identify as campesinos and campesinas. They are part of the farm worker community here in Sonoma County that are working the land, growing the food, working in vineyards, having direct relationship with the land and the local food and wine industry, and yet are arguably the most oppressed class in our bioregion. And so the highlights of this project is that, and this is underway, this is a multi-year project that is coming together through multiple sectors. And by that, I mean government, nonprofit, and the people themselves, and working together toward land justice for the campesinos and campesinas. So we're in the midst right now of a multi-year strategy that is culturally rooted in organizing support for Somos Tierra, as well as education and strategy as we work with a public land agency that is intending to do its first of many land transitions into the care and stewardship of the campesina community in Sonoma County. And this project also requires a significant commitment to language justice, as the farm worker community is primarily a Spanish-speaking community, and many of the other institutional partners do not have bilingual abilities. In our compass, the orientation of this project is to bridge between a public land initiative and the material needs of the people who work the land. Through easements that serve the mission and vision of all parties, and through the creation of a culturally affirming title holding entity that serves Somos Tierra and the campesina community. Those in reunion, of course, are the organizing group of Somos Tierra, as well as the larger campesino community they seek to serve and that they are part of. On the relinquishment side of the compass, Sonoma Ag and Open Space is actively involved in the acquisition and relinquishment of the title. And like most title holders, they have blind spots, but unlike in our last case study, they are actively seeking to learn and understand how to serve the farm worker community. And what they offer is dynamic and essential to the process. However, they are not fully aware of the reality on the ground for the campesinos. So there are a lot of ecosystem collaborators involved in this project who can be and are deeply involved in building on-the-ground relationships with Somos Tierra. So in this case, the Center for Ethical Land Transition, together with the North Bay Organizing Project and the Sustainable Economies Law Center, are providing ongoing support. And we also have a need to partner with land paths, which I will describe more in the next slide. Again, the collaborators are Somos Tierra themselves. And the North Bay Organizing Project and North Bay Jobs with Justice are both local organizations that are deeply rooted in popular education and liberatory organizing with systemically oppressed communities, and in this case, the farm workers. Early on in this project, North Bay Jobs with Justice was very crucial in helping to build trusted relationships, while the ongoing organizing is supported by North Bay Organizing Project. Sonoma Ag and Open Space is a public agency that stewards the Vital Lands Initiative, which allocates taxpayer dollars to preserve agricultural and open spaces of Sonoma County, mostly through acquiring easements and their innovative new Buy, Protect, Sell program. In this situation, they are indispensable partners and also in some ways pass-through title holders, which is more, there's a lot of details to this strategy that I am not going fully into, but I will name that Land Paths, which is a land stewarding organization with a commitment to BIPOC access, is the pass-through title holder, ultimately who has agreed to hold title to the land for the time that it takes Somos Tierra to create their culturally affirming title holding entity. Again, partnering with the Sustainable Economies Law Center, our organization is the facilitation and design team, helping to bring this all together and hold the coherence over multiple years. The vision that we're all serving is to build a bridge between a public land initiative and the material needs of the people who work the land, and to create access in order to heal, attain food sovereignty, and eventually to build housing as well. Our facilitative support is part of a coalition with the other organizations named the North Bay Organizing Project and the Sustainable Economies Law Center to support Somos Tierra in articulating their wants, needs, and their vision for a culturally affirmative relationship with land. These wants and needs have been ongoingly translated to Sonoma Ag and Open Space to support the land acquisition, the creation of easements, and a land transition strategy that allows Somos Tierra to hold title in a way that works for them. We also, of course, translate Sonoma Ag and Open Space towards Somos Tierra in terms of understanding how the easements that Sonoma Ag and Open Space creates are making sure that they are in alignment with Somos Tierra's vision for the land. What's very important in this project is that we have an interim title holding plan so that Sonoma Ag and Open Space can go about supporting us in the acquisition and price reduction through the easements, while Somos Tierra builds their group, their collective intelligence, their vision, their plan, and without rushing them into a title holding entity too soon. They need and want also to meet the land first. So this strategy gives them an opportunity to build their power and formalize their entity in relationship with land. And the liberatory organizing that supports this is fundamental, because there is a sustained relationship with this community, with an appreciation for the language justice that allows for their power to build collectively and for them to own the process in which they regenerate their own relationship with labor and land. So I certainly hope that these case studies, as complex as they're complex processes, and we did our best to distill them in a way that would translate. And we're available, of course, for questions. And I noticed that some very good ones have already come in. And before we move to that, I will hand the presentation back to Neha. Thank you so very much.
Thank you all so much for being here with us as we share more stories. And there's so much more that we could share about what we're seeing in this movement and what we think is next for this movement. And it's going to take all of us, all of the different perspectives that we hold, to nurture this new wave that is happening, this reckoning of how important it is to be reunited with land and therefore each other, the more than human world, language, culture, and so much more. We at Center for Ethical Land Transition are so committed to continuing to listen and to learn and to create resources and frameworks that can support all of us in whatever lens we have in the land justice, spatial reparations movement. And we're also committed to growing a collective of practitioners who can help hold the movement infrastructure necessary as we shift from one worldview into the next. There is so much more that we could share, but for now, we'd love to offer a few ways to stay in touch. We'll drop this in chat as well, but you can join our newsletter where we share more stories of rematriation, reparations, balance, and justice. You can follow us on different platforms, and you can also reach out directly. We'd love to be in collaboration and find ways for there to be mutually supportive projects and so much more. Thank you so much. I'll make sure to put these in chat again, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're now going to transition into Q&A. We have a lot of questions from the audience. Thank you all so much for sharing questions and yeah, just being in tune with us and staying around to hear about all of this amazing work. If we can spotlight Selt and Tina, so we can all be up here to answer questions. So I think it looks like most of the questions are actually for CELT, so I hope y'all are prepared to go into a little bit more detail about some of the things that people have questions about, and we're happy to jump in as it makes sense to. But the first question is, do land projects include learning the history of the land? If so, how is the learning incorporated into the project?
Y'all want me to come in on this one? The absolutely the learning about the history of the land is very important. All of our projects that we serve are interested in understanding the layers of titling that go down to the broken treaties and understanding what the context is that that the land project is working within the First Nations journey towards their own restoration of land and culture. So it's a strong part of our projects, and I would say weighs in differently. Some projects are all about that, like all the way. And then other projects would be in acknowledgement and working with that story to repair those relationships through time, over time, I would say. And I'm curious how my teammates, if there's anything you would add.
Okay, I want to make sure that you can hear me. Am I coming through clearly? Okay.
Yes.
I think an additional piece to that is understanding maybe some of the projects we've worked on, the land has been extracted from, so it's been logged. There's different extractive practices that happened over the last 100 years. And so those pieces are really important to understand in the current state, ecological state of the land, and how, and part of the listening to the land so that the land can be given the space and support it needs to heal.
Thank you. And so the next question is from one of the Spatial Futures Fellows at NETAPE. Thank you. He said, can you speak to the intersection of meeting people in our current system and how you transition to your vision? For example, do you purchase land and then transition that ownership to a new ownership stewardship model? Have you had to transition land from your system back out into the current majority system?
Well, to be clear, we don't ourselves hold title to land. So the Center for Ethical Land Transition, we provide facilitation and educational support for land and those who are in transition with the land. And so I think to what you're saying, we have not seen land have to go back. In thank goodness at this point. So I'm curious if how we might expand on that question too. If someone else sees a pathway in there, or if I missed something.
No, I think your response makes total sense. And yes, fortunately, you have not seen that happen yet, and hopefully never will. This question is for Abby specifically. They ask, could you speak a little more about the resiliency hubs that you mentioned? Also would like to hear more about your work in disability justice.
Okay, to begin, we are clearly living in times of ecological crisis and increased political upheaval and different things. And so part of the idea of these resiliency hubs are actually places of accessibility for more marginalized communities to have that safe space that I spoke about earlier. Some of the groups that we're working with are really focused on water and supporting the water flow on their land. And even some people have spoken about, you know, just having solid places that water is accessible for generations to come. And so the more land that we can get into the stewardship of into diverse stewardship to create these resiliency hubs and spaces of safety, the more we can ensure that communities have places to go if that time comes. So that's really the resiliency hub piece. In terms of disability justice and land accessibility and land, we have worked with an organization that has really focused on disability justice in terms of how they're designing their buildings, how they're designing their trails, how they're strategizing and visioning their power sources. Like I said earlier, for our relatives who utilize medical devices here in California, we deal with power blackouts from fires, from the heat and different things, and a lot of our disabled relatives are impacted by these power outages. And so it's really about being prepared for all of us. And one of the tenets of disability justice is no one is left behind. We think about everyone. And that's not just a disability justice tenet, but that is also a traditional and Indigenous tenet that we think about everyone in our community. And so our resiliency hubs are really, just a circle all the way back, are safe places where everybody is thought of, and we move at the pace of the person that would technically be at the back of the line. We make sure everybody comes along. So I am learning more about disability justice and wanting to coalition build deeper so that I have more resources for the folks that I work with. And I guess one more thing is even, encouraging folks to think of funding in that way as well, to include disability justice into the development of their projects.
Thank you, Abby. So the next question asks, how do you partner with entities like the Nature Conservancy, which conserves land, but has a very strong lean towards monetizing the natural world with deed restrictions, like buying land, conserving it, then reselling, and mostly working with wealthy people who bring very colonial ideas with them?
Thanks so much for this question, Dr. Deborah. It's a really important thing to acknowledge all of the different ways that our systems and relationships touch land. And not all of these relationships are completely values aligned in the way that we see them. And this is a part of the cultural narrative shift or the cultural and educational work necessary to help all of us who are interconnected by land to see ways that we can use influence or power in some ways for greater good. And it's one thing to be in conversation with people, and it's another to be in deep collaboration with them. And we are open to being in conversation with all sorts of organizations, and we're extremely discerning about who we specifically collaborate with. And another point on this is we don't want to go out and accidentally create another silo of a movement, because that would be a disservice to the work that is trying to uplift everyone. And to not be in a silo means to engage with the parties or the organizations who we may have some disagreements with, and to find some common ground, and to hopefully eventually transform that into grounding justice. So I that doesn't speak specifically to the Nature Conservancy and their work. However, I hope that that shares our larger ethos around who we're very open to be in dialogue with and where we might be more discerning. We are also a small but mighty team of 4 people, and we want to move at the speed of trust and the speed of relationship, and to not accidentally force ourselves into something that we're not actually able to hold with integrity. I'm curious if Cassandra or Abby or Jason have more to add there.
We had the opportunity to attend the Land Trust Alliance conference and to witness what you're talking about the deep entrenchment of the land trust, not just the Nature Conservancy, but land trust at large are holding up colonial frameworks and transacting easements in ways that are really upholding a lot of separation in many respects. And there are people within the Nature Conservancy that are also learning and trying to learn. And the land trust movement itself is now hosting whole, parts of their conference to understand Black history and relationship with land and First Nations history, and like they're beginning the long learning journey that it will take. And some land trusts are acting in solidarity with Native land back movements now, and are actually using their capacity, their organizational capacity, to acquire land. And they're doing that as the interim title holder and in solidarity and cooperation with their local Indigenous allies to rematriate land. So there are really amazing, unlikely partnerships also developing in this transitional ecosystem that we're in. And I think we're going to see a lot of transition over time. I would also point to First Light learning journeys on the East Coast that with their work in the Wabanaki Commission are transitioning thousands of acres of land trust land into Indigenous-led land trusts or First Nations holdings. So there's some where is it going to take a long time? So we got to support those growths.
And I'm going to actually jump to this question because you mentioned this again, but someone asked, can you please explain what an easement is? And can someone please speak more about what the Vital Land Initiative is? He noted that it's interesting to hear that taxpayer dollars are available to do this work. So if you can share briefly what an easement is.
An easement is in the current titling system, as fictional and broken as it is, an easement is something that is said to run with the land. So it is an agreement to generally agree not to do something, like not to log or not to, do something that's ecologically bad for the land. But it can also be an agreement to do something. An easement can be affirmative. It can say, I promise that I will farm this land and anybody on title forever will farm this land. And so an easement is an agreement that attaches itself to the title of the land and runs with the land in perpetuity. And it's very hard to legally undo an easement. And so that's the answer to that question. And the Vital Lands Initiative was a voted on measure here in Sonoma County that collects taxpayer dollars to preserve and protect the open space and agricultural qualities of this county. And so the Sonoma Ag and Open Space uses easements to do that work, both protecting lands from being logged or vineyards grown on them or something, or the affirmative kind of easement that promises to do agricultural work. And so that's hopefully helps to answer that. And you can learn about it online. It's a very innovative and program that right now, as I shared, is also trying to see how that can really support our local food sovereignty and our local food growers.
I will add one point to the easement comment or definition that Cassandra just shared, which is the distinction between a conservation easement and a cultural easement. Conservation easements are seen as are easements that people are often more familiar with because they have to do with protecting forests or protecting the natural attributes of land. But something that's coming up more recently is what has been called a cultural easement. And a cultural easement is typically put in place in order to protect some type of cultural access to that land, so that original peoples who have been in relationship to that land have the right to engage with that land in a way that is culturally affirmative for them. And it utilizes a similar legal pathway that the conservation easements use, but is about creating culturally affirmative access to land that's separate from ownership of land.
Thank you so much. So this next question, would love to open it to everyone. And sorry, Tina, I'm going to put you on the spot to maybe kick us off with some examples of this. But someone asked, how can Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and relationship with the land be incorporated or centered when trying to repair specific historical injustices tied to land and experiences of other cultures? So, for example, African American displacement in gentrifying cities. So how are we incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing and being in relationship?
I think this depends very much on where you are and what the Indigenous ways of knowing in your place are. For me, I am a Indigenous Uchinanchu or Okinawan woman living as a settler in occupied Hawaii, which is Kanaka Maoli land. So I bring kind of two knowledge systems with me. They're very different, but because I'm on Hawaiian lands, that structures a lot of the ways that I think about my relationship to land. And so one framework that helps me to think about, to think beyond the logics of property is the word kuleana, or the idea and value of kuleana. In Hawaiian, kuleana, or in English, kuleana can roughly be translated to reciprocal responsibility between one another or between you and the land that you care for. This idea that we don't just have a relationship of ownership to land, but that we each take care of each other, that the land takes care of us just as we take care of it. And what's really interesting is that here in Hawaii, when land was originally transitioned into private property tenureship, the word kuleana, because it also implies rights and responsibilities, became the word that relates to land title. And so you can either see that as a gross mistranslation and appropriation of that word, or you can, in building these new systems, take it very seriously as an orientation towards the ways that we relate to our title, not just as owners, but as responsibility holders. So I think, again, that question depends on where you are, whose land you're on, and how those people are leading. But for me, that's one example that stands out here in occupied Hawaii.
Thanks, Tina. And curious if Abby or Neha, if you have any examples that you're seeing from your work around how folks are thinking about this or incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing and being.
I do want to say that relationship building is key. And
Javi, could you
Oh.
put your mic closer?
thank you. Yeah. Relationship building is key. And, you know, recently, actually the end of June, Reunion held its first in-person gathering that was largely Black and Native. And it really actually created a space for conversation. And that was really powerful because that process really illuminated our community's desire to have sweet spaces to sit and talk and share information, share strategies, and actually talk about our lives and our lineages. And those moments of pause actually really enable that embodied understanding of the deep intersections of violence and oppression that has happened to a lot of our people. And it's not an us and them. And at this time, it's us. And look at this timeline. Look at what happened to natives here on Turtle Island and enslaved Black people at the same time with a common, you know, perpetrator. And so for me, I think I would like to continue and also recognize that creating these spaces for conversation, not just information, you know, are really important for our community.
Thank you. Cassandra, question for you. Can you please share more detail on the Lisjan Olani example, specifically how you interacted with the previous owner and worked through their ignorance and ultimately achieved your goal? What were those conversations like, and how did having a multiracial team contribute to achieving your goal?
Thank you. I wish I could say that we were able to do more to influence the perspective of the title holders. In that situation, it was very painful, and we mostly our multiracial strategy was on our team. And then we created, you know, my whiteness really got put to use in terms of kind of dealing with, talking with, negotiating with the title holders, and us filtering what we felt that they could actually handle knowing and still proceed with the process. So it was very painful for all of us to invisibilize members of our team and of the vision of the land in order to do what we felt that needed to be done to achieve actually transitioning the land. And so if there hadn't been a white real estate agent and other people that could kind of come forward to talk about the coalition that was forming to care for this land, we feared that the title holders would actually have, that their racism would have prevailed. And so there are certain risks we didn't take. And sometimes that is, we've also used that strategy in other times where we just can't run the risk of rural racism because the location is so important to the people. And so that requires a multiracial team to stay connected and grounded in why we're doing what we're doing so that we don't harm each other, even though we're navigating something very painful together.
I would love to just say one more thing on the tail end of your share, Cassandra. Oh, yes, always. Being on that land, I have to say there's nothing like the feeling of liberated land. That, not only are people experiencing oppression, but the land and all of the beings on that land experience that oppression as well. And just one more time, being on liberated, rematriated land is an incredible feeling. And so I'm just grateful for everybody who strategized for that whole process. And then to be able to be on that land and make offerings on that land, heal on that land, and see, an intergenerational future for that land is pretty incredible.
Thank you both for your insights. So we have maybe time for one or two more questions, and I would encourage our presenters, if you have time, to jump in and answer some questions that maybe can be answered in writing. That would be awesome, so we can try to get to as many as possible. But I'm going to jump around a little bit. There was a question that came through. This is related to Megan's question above, which I did not see, but the conversation about cultural and conservation easements made me think about bridging strategies and how we might create beneficial impacts with easements, but not fundamentally change dynamics of property ownership. How do we ensure that the policies and tools we use affect the deep transformation we more broadly and for specific communities want to see? So whoever wants to take that.
I know I'm talking a lot and I don't mean to be. So I apologize for that. I think with our team, I have a lot of the direct client experience with the land transition. So sometimes this happens a little bit. We're working to change that. But for some Indigenous communities, having cultural access is what they need because they're already stewarding the land. They're already in ceremonial relationship, but don't have access to certain places. And while they may not be